Hi, everyone. I'm here today with Susan Dippold from Carney, Badley, and Spellman law firm. Susan, you've been a member of CAMPS for quite a while, and I know your background, more than a couple of decades, helping businesses and transitions with a specialty in tax law. So I'm really excited to dig in today to tell our members more about you and what you do and why it's relevant. But I did want to start with the idea that most manufacturing companies, and I dare to say most of them, are going to be facing an exit of some sort in the next 5 to 10 years. It's just the way the demographics are stacked up in manufacturing.
We've seen that coming for a while. Some people have gotten exhausted over the last few years. So we've had the Great Recession, we've had COVID, we've had tariffs, we've had a lot of different issues where people who are getting close to retirement age are kind of thinking, now might be the right time to get out before the next big crisis comes.
Yes, and so I feel that this conversation is going to be so relevant to so many manufacturers, but I think it could be helpful for them because I often think I need an attorney in this process. But what does an attorney with your skills, background, credentials, what do you do for manufacturers in this process from start to finish?
There's just a difference in exit strategy, whether it's gifting or transferring to family members or employees versus an outright third-party sale. But I'll speak first to that kind of outside third-party sale, because that's the most involved part for our team. And we really start working with them as soon as we can. I'm sure we'll talk about,
Yes.
preparation. But once the process really gets kicked off, what we do is we receive the letter of intent or the term sheet for the deal, and we can help advise on the structure and maybe put some legal parameters in there from the get-go so we don't have to be negotiating all those details later on in the process. So they're sure upfront that they're getting the deal they want. And that kind of depends on whether it's an unsolicited offer or whether they're going out either with an investment banker or a broker to have a more competitive process and get competitive bids. But we evaluate those. And then once they've signed that term sheet or letter of intent, we go from there. They often kick into the financial due diligence piece before we come in on the legal side. But once we do, we are helping them respond to a long list of legal due diligence requests for information and documents. And we are helping them get those uploaded to an online data room where it's shared both with our team and the buyer's legal team. Then we are negotiating the purchase agreement in parallel to that due diligence process. And the purchase agreement typically has a bunch of representations and warranties, basically promises they're making about the state of their business. With that, in tandem, we create what's called a disclosure schedule, which is the purchase agreement will say, except as set forth in the disclosure schedule, we have no litigation. Or here on the disclosure schedule, you're listing out all your employees and their salaries and their start dates and all of that. So that becomes a really robust document. And then one of our key work streams that we're working on, the more we can be robust and have full responses there, the more we can protect against any indemnification claims, which is how the buyer potentially come back and claw back money. And we want to protect against that.
That was a really good description, and it was a lot. So also I think it tells a business owner who doesn't typically deal with mergers or exits or whatever the gifting or whatever the case may be, but it tells them that this is very involved. And legally, you want to be very careful, I think, what you represent or how you represent it, because it could have negative consequences if you're not careful.
That's right. We take a lot of effort in disclosing things that might sound otherwise tricky and disclosing them in a full way, but in a way that says this shouldn't be a big deal, that this is covered by insurance, or for whatever reason, we don't think this is going to be a big issue.
That could be so helpful in a transaction, reassuring even. Your description also made me think about why it's wise to engage with you early in the process. So I'm sure that I know this is hard when people come to you with something they need done yesterday, But this isn't one of those times when you can say, hey, this thing came up and I need this right now. So typically, what do you like to see in times of time frames?
Ideally, a potential client would come to us at least a year ahead of time because there are some planning opportunities both on the personal side and on the business side that we can help achieve if we're starting early. But often clients do come to us and they're brand new clients to us. They say, I just got this offer. What do I do? So sometimes it's not possible, but ideally we would be working with them at least a year beforehand, if not longer than that. And we'll get into some of the tax reasons why, but that's mainly a driver for it, as well as just being prepared overall. We can introduce them to other advisors that kind of surround them as a team to really get the best outcome. If your financial data, often these businesses, there's a lot of personal expenses running through the business, and we need to get those carved out and get a clean set of books. And there's a lot of other professionals that we work with, like your financial planner or wealth manager, who can really help set you up in the right direction. So really a team approach, and assembling that team ahead of time is pretty key. And often our clients, I think you alluded to, they haven't really been working with an attorney, or at least not an attorney to us,
You're right.
for a long time. And we're happy to jump in and take a fresh look at the business and its readiness really to move forward.
I don't know if you're seeing this as more unusual, but this idea of getting an unsolicited offer, which it seems like there's a lot of people out there shopping right now, but it's okay if they're coming to you right away with an unsolicited offer. Like you said, the time frames are different, and maybe there's some planning items that would be better if it were a planned event, but it's still good to come to you with that unsolicited offer.
It is ideally before they've signed it, although we
Yeah.
get that as well. Sometimes people think that's a really compelling offer. That's more than I ever expected, or for whatever reason, they've decided that is the right buyer, the right time, the right price. And that's fine, but we do want them to know really what they're signing up for. Sometimes from my perspective, I look at what is the tax structure that's being proposed, and is there a better way that we could structure that for our client to get the better outcome?
That leads right into a great question about tax implications around an exit. And I can only imagine that is a very big piece of what you do because it's a specialty of yours. But the consequences are so huge if you don't, like you said, if you're not thinking about the tax implications or the how you approach it. Share with us your experience.
Now more than ever, especially in Washington for our local clients, it has become front of mind because of our Washington capital gains tax primarily, which is still fairly new for everyone to deal with. And there are a couple of things that people approach me with questions about. One of them is, should I be a C corporation? Would that really help me from a tax perspective when I exit? And the answer is maybe, and it depends. So there is this provision in the tax code called qualified small business stock, and manufacturers would qualify for that if they have less than now $75 million worth of assets. And so if you got your stock when it was before that valuation, then you still qualify. You have
Okay.
to hold your stock for a period of time. It used to be 5 years. Now it's down to 3 for a half benefit of that, kind of a tiered benefit. But you can exclude up to $10 million or now $15 million per taxpayer
Oh,
when you
wow.
sell the stock. So that is super compelling. And to add to that, it also, right now at least, is an exemption from the Washington capital gains tax because Washington is following the federal rules on that. That may not always be the case. I know been a proposal to change that, but right now that's the case. But I've actually heard people think that's going to be a slam dunk, and it's not necessarily a slam dunk. So it depends on who your natural buyer might be. If there's a competitor or a strategic company out there that could use your capabilities and add them on to theirs, they might be willing to just straight up buy your stock and have you be a subsidiary. And that would work out beautifully. But if it's more of a private equity or what we call a financial buyer, that may not end up being the scenario where you get to optimize that. So we've had clients who say, I want to have a stock sale so that I can use this provision of the tax code. And the private equity group says, I don't want a C Corp in my kind of chain of ownership. And also, if you insist on that, I've already modeled in all these tax deductions that I won't get. And so I'm going to come way down in purchase price if you insist on that structure. So that's where we work with really great accounting teams in the area to model that out for our clients, put some numbers to it, and figure out what's best. So I wouldn't say just to everyone that being a C Corp is the way to go. It really depends on what the outcome might be.
In fact, I find those conversations about what type of corporate structure, tax deductions, and all that is very complicated. That's why you need an expert. And again, you can make so many mistakes. And what I'm hearing, I've heard you allude to it, that sometimes people come to you with a deal they feel good about the buyer, and they're just all in, but they haven't thought through the tax consequences. It could be
I don't
a
want
big
people
miss.
to sign up for something they're not fully aware of what the outcome will be. And then we have people approach us to say, should I move out of state? What are my alternatives? So we talk that through. And it's not just a snapshot in time. It's like I'm here today and tomorrow I'm gone. And then the next day I'm selling my business. So you really have to do a lot of pre-planning, even if that's your desired pathway. And not everybody wants to move. I mean, people who've got grandchildren in the area, do you
Exactly. I
really?
was thinking the same thing.
So there's some strategies, especially if they're working with a financial advisor. Years beforehand, they could engage in some tax loss harvesting strategies on their personal side. And they're building up a whole bunch of losses that they can then offset the capital gain with. So that's ideal. But again, you would have to really pre-plan to manage of that. The other thing that people do ahead of time on the personal side is set up trusts, go get a valuation from an appraiser who is not thinking about a sale on the horizon. They're thinking about what it's worth right now. And then there's discounts on that valuation for lack of control and lack of marketability for a private company. So you can take that discounted valuation, no ego with that, right? You want a discount on that one, and use that discounted value to gift some of the stock or LLC interests to a trust for your kids or outright to your kids, but use up less of your lifetime estate tax exemption. Again, if you plan early, you can use that strategy. But if you've already signed a letter of intent or a term sheet, we can't, because the IRS will say you've locked in the value. We know what it is. So that's why it's really good to start talking early, plan ahead. And also, we haven't really talked about this yet, but figure out what is your exit strategy. It might not be selling to an outside third party. It might be that you can afford to just gift it to your kids. It might be okay to gift it to an employee by awarding them ownership interests in your business or having them buy in. And that's just somewhat dependent on your tax structure of your business. And it really depends on what number you need to achieve out of that exit. So if all your eggs are in that basket, it's probably not going to be possible to just give it away. And employees typically don't pay the same amount as an outside third party would. So figuring out with your financial advisor what you can afford, what your goals are in retirement, and knowing your number will give you really some certainty on which path to go down. And then we can take you from point A to point B based on that.
You've been sharing these incredible insights, I think, from years of experience. I'm picturing people listening to this and going, wow, I hadn't thought of that. Wow, I hadn't thought of that. One of the things you mentioned was about employees. And so sometimes how you treat your exit in terms of the employees, and this might be key employees who need to stay. Maybe there's going to be bonus structures or equity, some kind of a play to keep them. I don't know. What have you seen on the employee side?
So there's a variety of things that we think about. The first thing that I typically ask a business owner is, what do your employees, what do you think would motivate your employees the most? Would it be actual ownership interests in your business, or do they really just want some extra cash? And sometimes they think they know what the employee wants, but then the employee says, If they think, oh, I think my employee wants ownership, but then we talk to the employee and they realize that maybe their personal financial statements will be on the line for a personal guarantee to the bank or with a bond. And they say, ooh, I don't want that kind of risk. There's a reason why they're not the entrepreneur and that they're the employee sometimes. Really, if it's just that they would rather have cash, we can definitely take care of that in a variety of ways. If they do want ownership, we talked to the business owner about potentially using some non-voting ownership interests so that they maintain all the control. Or maybe they don't care about that, but they'll give them just a minority percentage so that they maintain control as well. Control their own destiny. And if they do ultimately end up wanting to sell, we want to make sure that we can bring along any other owners in that decision-making process. We call that a drag along, right? But trying to be gentle there.
Sure.
But as far as giving them some cash piece out of the transaction, there are things as complicated as phantom equity plans where you have to go value the business every now and then to make sure you're measuring the growth and give a piece of that growth value, to the simplest version that we use often, which is a transaction bonus agreement. And that can either be for a fixed dollar figure, or it can be a percentage of the net proceeds from a sale. And you have to be present to win. So that retains the person that you want to retain until you close the deal. And that can be a really valuable tool as well. So we often are using that, especially for either the CFO or the controller or whoever will be that key person who's helped you that mountain of due diligence requests and has put in a lot of work and effort, and you want to let them know about the deal. You want to have a confidentiality provision in there, of course, but you want their help in getting through that finish line. And so that's a big motivator too.
I think it's really good for them to be thinking in terms of incentives to keep key or long-term employees in place. And where this could be a financial benefit to the owner, they have to think a little more broadly. How do they make it a financial, or at least it's some type of incentive? And like you said, you may think you know what they want, but you may want to ask. At a certain point, a lot of this needs to remain confidential up until the last moment. But I'm sure you coach people through that whole
We do. In fact, we even ask, where will our invoices go within your company? Because if they're going to your accounts payable team, we will make sure we don't give them all the details. And we will make sure that the invoice doesn't say sale of business on the front. So we're very well versed in confidentiality, because employees finding out before they should, or before you want them to, is a recipe for a lot of dissension. And at least it's uncertainty and not great for morale. So we definitely don't want that.
Yes. And when somebody's, maybe they're looking ahead and they're saying, I'm not going to, like, for all the reasons you stated earlier, I'm not going to last forever and I need to be thinking about an exit. What kind of conversation do you recommend that they have with you or a financial advisor? Where do they start if they're not sure how to exit their business?
They can start with any one of the advisors that I've talked about, but if they're talking with me, I definitely welcome that conversation. And it really can just be, I don't know what I want to do yet. And then we can bring a team around them to figure that out. But I have had clients pass away, and then we've been selling the business not in an optimal state, right? I'm working with things at that point and they don't get along, and it's definitely not optimizing the value, and can be not the legacy that the business owner really wanted. So wherever you start, somewhere, and start the conversation, because you will exit your business whether you plan to or not. And you don't want it to be that way, right?
And you want to control the variables. And so many manufacturing companies are family-owned businesses. And what kind of considerations do they want to be thinking about in terms of preserving relationships and working within family dynamics?
I'm often working with family members who are either co-owners or they work in the business. And I would say the number one thing is communicate, and communicate early. and to include the kids who both work in the business and those who don't, so that everybody's on the same page about what's going to be happening. I've had some really good outcomes, especially when they involve me in the conversations, or maybe they want to involve their financial advisor in those conversations. But to have an outside third party expert, so to speak, be part of that can ease tensions. If I'm asking the hard questions or helping navigate the hard discussion, it can be a little bit smoother sometimes. We've had some excellent outcomes where one brother was going to stay in the business and run it as the continuing CEO after private equity bought in. And the other was going to get out completely. And so they said, well, it's not fair that I have to work a lot harder than you going forward. So how about out of your portion of the proceeds, you'll pay the investment banker's fee?
Oh,
And they agreed to that because he
okay.
recognized I'm getting off scot-free in a sense, and you're going to have to put in a lot more effort after the fact. And so we'll negotiate that and navigate that ahead of time and come to that agreement. And that was pretty seamless in the end. Less hard feelings. I think some people think we'll just avoid that or we'll talk about it later. But I haven't seen that help.
Yeah.
That doesn't usually help the situation.
But knowing that you as a professional can help them with sometimes those difficult conversations is huge. And again, nothing that has to be avoided, but something that with your help will make things better going forward. That just has pluses all the way.
And if the path forward is, hey, my one child who works in the business, I'm going to give it all to them, either now or in my will or something, we can have that conversation too, because then the other siblings, you might have other kids who are thinking, okay, what do I get if sister or brother gets the whole thing? And there's ways that you can equalize that, either by other assets that you own or a life insurance policy that they will be the beneficiaries of. So there's ways that if you plan ahead that you can kind of keep peace within the family so that everybody's happy.
That is really good to know. You are helping your clients through some of the biggest financial decisions or financial events they might have in their life. And you've been doing this for many years. And I know that when people come to you initially, it can be a little intimidating, meaning they haven't done this before. It's a big deal. And I guess I'm kind of asking for your wish list of things that you would tell somebody before they come to see you that'll help them be more prepared for the conversation, make them feel more comfortable in the conversation.
So there's a variety of things. One would be talk to your financial advisor about what that should really be a person who's going to speak to your finances, your goals, and your retirement. And they can do some kind of stress testing around what you have and what you might need in order to meet your goals. And they usually figure out what you need to live until you're 95 or even beyond. And they can kind of move those parameters around and make sure that even if everything turns out to be the worst possible scenarios, that you're still going to be fine. So knowing what your number is and what you need to get out of your business in the end will help us figure out which path forward you're going to take. Can you afford to just gift it to a kid because you have so much outside the business? Or do you really need to maximize that value because you've had your head down for 30 years building this business and it's really your baby? And so we need to think about who are the potential buyers out there. And I'm always happy to connect people with other advisors in this ecosystem who come alongside a business owner who's thinking about these questions and these exit strategies. If they come to me first, that's great. I'm happy to connect them with other people. And also the right team. Like I said, you might have been bumping along for years without an attorney. You haven't needed one, and congratulations, that's awesome. And we often work with people who haven't really needed an attorney before, or they have a family attorney or somebody who did their lease or some distinct thing that doesn't do what we do all day in and out. And we say, great, that's fine. We will work alongside that person. They know the history of the business. They probably have some intel that will be useful in those disclosures that we create. But if they don't do what we do day to day or have the bench strength to move quickly and really run a robust process like that, then we're happy to jump in and work with who you already have and partner with them, because it can be really beneficial for us too, to have somebody who's got that history. Same with the accounting team. I often encounter business owners who say, I have an accountant, but all they do is my tax returns year to year. And then we talk about maybe you might need to level up to an accounting firm that has a team that does transactions like this, or someone who has more estate and trust tax experience, who can help figure out both the personal and the business side of the transaction and model those things out that might need to put some numbers to the page. So there's a couple of different ways where we want to get the right team in place ahead of time and surround that person with the expertise that will really lead to the best outcome. Sometimes when we're working with somebody who just doesn't get it or has never done this before, and we're educating them along the way, that it's not necessarily the best outcome. So the team and the strategy and knowing your number, I think, are pretty key ahead of time.
I think that would help somebody come in with a more level of comfort if they knew their number. And knowing, I think what's really comforting too is the fact that you can help them with every stage. If they come to you first, or if they come to you with their advisor, it sounds like to me that you've been through this so many times, you've helped so many businesses, that you could really help somebody make good decisions. But you talked about bench strength and team strength, because that's what gets it over the finish line with the least amount of problems. And especially where this is maybe one of the biggest financial events of their lives. But I would imagine that without the right tax planning, it doesn't feel that good to have a bigger chunk go to the government compared to you.
And people need to understand at least what the triggers are: stock sale versus an asset sale. If you're a partnership or an S corporation or a C corporation, the outcome can be a little bit different. And kind of understanding where you are and where you want to be, we can kind of help plan ahead or restructure as needed, get the accounting team to help model that out and make the best decisions that you can. Again, we can't always foresee what the outcome is, but I at least want people to know what the potential opportunities and outcomes could be, so that they don't look back and regret not doing something differently.
So when somebody watches this and they say, I really do want to talk to Susan and she'd be the best person to help me, how do they get a hold of you? And of course, I'll have all of your contact information in the description of the video, but if you just tell them how to reach you.
They can always call me, but the best, honestly, is the email, because that way we can be asking for a little bit of information that we need for what we call a conflicts check. So within our ethical rules, we can't really start talking and get confidential information about your business or about you until we know that we're not conflicted out or representing somebody who's against you, anything like that. So we do that first, and then we schedule just an introductory meeting and go from there. I'm often in a position where something is that's imminent and things are moving already. And so we just need to jump in and build that trust right away from the get-go and build that rapport. And that's one of the fun challenges of my job, which I love.
And I think it's great that they can just reach out to you by email. What is your email address?
It's S as in Susan, Dippold at Carney Law.
And carneylaw.com. And I'll have all this contact information, but I want to thank you for the insight. It just comes from so many years of experience and watching, I think, so many successful transactions over the years. And so my big hope for this is that it would make those who listen more comfortable with the whole process, with the idea, but coming to you earlier and coming a little more prepared than they might have otherwise.
I hope so. I think one of the things that I encounter out in the world is that business owners are reluctant to admit or think about the fact that they might be for sale. So I hope that people will be realistic about what their goals are, their expectations, and that will help them really come to us a little bit earlier than a lot of them do. So I think that would be really helpful. And when we get to that closing day where they're getting a big wire transfer, and everybody's really happy. That's the most satisfying part of my job,
Yeah.
is really helping them take that business and turn that into a liquidity event where they've got money for the rest of their lives, for all their goals, maybe even for some legacy family benefit. And we've helped them through that transition. So that's really satisfying to me and why I love my job.
It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for this today, Susan. We can't wait to tell the manufacturers about you and make more connections.
Great. Thank you, Kirk.